Hi, Michael.
Hello, Gav.
Awesome. How are you, man?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Thank you for agreeing to be on Stay Outstanding.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's do this. This sounds like it's going to be fun.
Mm.
So, before we get started, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about you and your life?
Sure. Yeah. I can give you a brief history of my life. I'll start up with what I'm doing at the moment. So I live in London. I'm an acupuncturist. I practice 5-element acupuncture. I also run an acupuncture school here in London where we teach people how to become 5-element acupuncturists. Do you want me to tell you a bit about how I got into it, or what else would you like to know?
Just a 90-second. Grew up in North London, did this, went to that school.
Well, I was actually born in Glasgow. It's an interesting story. My dad was working as a locum surgeon in Glasgow Royal Infirmary. So I was born in Glasgow, but I only ended up living there for the first 6 months of my life. So I obviously didn't really pick up the accent. But I am Scottish by birth. So I could play, if I could play anything, I could play for Scotland, but I can't play anything. Then moved to Manchester, lived with my family in Manchester until I was 12. And then my stepdad got a job in London and we moved down to London, Crouch End, and ended up going to University College London for university, where I studied neuroscience. And at one point was going to go into neuroscience as a career, but then acupuncture discovered me and kind of took me along a different path. And I'm sure at some point we'll talk a bit more about that. But yeah, I've been practicing acupuncture since 2003. So what's that, 18 years?
Amazing.
I practice in North London in Primrose Hill and absolutely love it.
So are you married, have any kids?
Not married yet. We've been trying to get married for the last year. I proposed to my fiancée Magda coming up to 2 years ago now, but because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to get married just yet. But we meant to get married in September last year. We had to reschedule it again for May. That didn't work out either. So now we've rescheduled it again for this September, and fingers crossed, we're going to be getting married in Krakow, which is where Magda's from, in Poland. We've got a beautiful venue. So,
well, congratulations and good luck with it.
Thank you very much.
I hope it goes ahead.
Thanks.
Just some quick fire questions to warm us up. What was your earliest memory?
My earliest memory. Okay, that was actually I went with my mum and dad and grandmother to Mexico when I was about 2 years old. Because my grandmother's brother had a house in Mexico, and I just have this weird kind of, I think early memories tend to be photographic. So I just have this kind of, I can picture it now, there's a kind of photographic image of sitting by this pool and his house, and a vague memory of playing with the dog and it biting me. this Labrador that I was playing with, and I was shoving a teddy bear in its face and it bit me. So that's my earliest memory.
So do you have any animals that gives you the creeps or you have fears over?
Well, I want to say spiders, actually. I lived in Costa Rica for about 6 months a while back. And I remember one evening we were watching TV and suddenly this enormous spider about the size of my hand just appeared on the wall behind the TV. And we were like, oh my God. And so that was pretty creepy. And then the next day we didn't get much sleep at all. We just kind of like barricaded ourselves in the bedroom. And the next day we talked to someone and they said, oh yeah, that's one of those chupacabras. They bite you and they inject this like poison into your hand, which is like necrotic. It eats away at the flesh in your body. So we're like, thank God we didn't get bitten.
Close escape there then.
So ever since then I've been slightly nervous of big spiders, but not the ones in this country, but just in other countries.
What's your favorite hobby?
My favorite, actually, playing the guitar at the moment. So I started learning guitar when I was about 11, and I started learning classical guitar, and then I moved on to electric guitar, and then I kind of gave it up for a while, and I've just got back into it. I just got myself a new guitar a couple of years ago, and yeah, I love playing electric guitar.
Awesome. Maybe next time if you come back on the show, you can give our audience a quick demo.
Sure, why not?
What's your favorite food?
My favorite food, sushi.
Sushi.
Definitely
So
sushi.
that would be your last meal on death row.
Yeah, really good sushi. It'd have to be good sushi though. But probably, I think that's one. If I was on death row, yes.
Cool. And finally, your best travel location.
My favorite travel location. Oh my god. I'm not sure. Sri Lanka. I do like Sri Lanka. Beautiful beaches, really friendly people, just super chill, that vibe. So yeah, I think Sri Lanka.
And nice spices.
Yeah, really good food. Really good food.
Awesome. So Stay Outstanding is I created as a platform to project my voice or our voices to try and influence, impact, or change people's worlds or mindset for the better. So the podcast is really all about mindset. So with that in mind, who was your biggest influence growing up and affected and still affects to this day your mindset and I guess your being, your persona?
Thank you. And that's a really good question. And it's only just recently I've started to realize this. So my grandmother, when I was growing up, we were very close. Particularly when I moved to London, because she lived in London, and I would visit her from the age of 12. And I guess in my kind of teenage years, particularly in my early 20s, I would see her all the time. And she became a real friend to me, but also a mentor. And I think kind of as I get older, I'm realizing exactly how much influence she had on me, because she was a photographer, and she worked for the Sunday Times magazine, but she also worked in Hollywood in the 1950s, and she photographed people like Marilyn Monroe. She photographed Malcolm X in America. So she was a really influential photographer, photojournalist, and but I think particularly she was just very groundbreaking in her approach. And because I got to know her, I got to see that she had this real amazing attitude. If we're talking about attitude and mindset, she just had this really. I mean, my dad calls it chutzpah, but it's more than that. She just had this ability to see what was possible, and she wasn't held back by this idea. A lot of people are held back by the idea of, well, it hasn't been done before, therefore, we shouldn't try it because it can't be done because nobody's done it. But she was the opposite. She really had this mindset of like, I'm going to try this out, and we're going to see what happens, and it's not always going to work out. But she did some amazing things in her life. So she was one of the first photographers allowed into Russia under communism in the 1970s. The same with China. She was sent by the Sunday Times magazine to photograph in China in the 1970s. She photographed the civil rights movement, often in kind of dangerous situations, kind of protests that were, kind of where she was the only white person, and there was, there was potential for kind of, it was kind of times when there was potential for danger, potential for that she was, that she was very brave to go into these situations, but she knew that she wanted to capture something that hadn't been shown before. She wanted to be kind of on the cutting edge of photojournalism, to actually kind of go out there and show things that people hadn't seen before. And I think it also, as a woman in the 1950s, so she didn't get into photography. This is something I always tell people as well. So she didn't get into actually taking pictures and becoming a photographer until she was in her 40s. And I think these days people often think, oh yeah, I'm in my 30s and I haven't made it yet. And I always tell the story that, well, my grandma didn't start taking photos until she was in her 40s. And also for a woman in the 1950s, even to have a career was kind of very groundbreaking. And most, it was kind of the done thing that a woman would be a housewife in the 1950s. So in the 1940s, during the war, she got a job at a photo finishing plant in for Kodak. So this was the days when the early days of when you could actually take a roll of film into the chemist and they would develop it for you and they would send you back the photos. Before that, you had to develop your pictures yourself. So she worked at a factory where they would actually process the photos, and she kind of rose up quite quickly through the ranks to become a manager there. That's kind of how she kind of became interested in photography. And then somebody gave her a camera, and she just started taking kind of amateur pictures around New York City, because she grew up she born in Philadelphia but lived in New York City. And then she went to a masterclass. She saw a masterclass by a photographer called Alexei Brodovich, and he was the art director of Harper's Bazaar, which was an American magazine at the time. And she tells this really interesting story about how she went along to the first class, and Alexei Brodovich said, "Who's got some pictures they'd like to show the class?" And she had an envelope full of pictures, and her friend next to her put her hand up forward and said, "Yeah." And she's like, "No, I don't want to show them." So anyway, they got shown in front of the class, and the Alexei Brodovich was brutal. He just kind of tore them apart because they were very amateurish. And she was just so embarrassed. But what she said was she learned so much about photography just from that one lesson, what he said about her photographs. And from that moment, she was like determined, right, I'm gonna do everything I can to make these next lot really amazing. So the next time I bring the photos to the class, they won't be ridiculed, but I'll have something valuable to offer. So she'd heard from somebody, I think it was her cleaning lady possibly, or the lady who looked after my dad, her son, that in Harlem they had fashion shows. So they had these amazing kind of fashion shows in Harlem that the white people wouldn't even know about. And she went up there and she got permission to go and photograph these fashion shows. And at that time, fashion photography was very much kind of studio lit and very kind of posed and all very kind of properly done. So she took these pictures that were really candid, of these models backstage, kind of getting undressed and getting into their clothes. And she just kind of didn't really know what she's supposed to be doing. So she kind of got up very close and kind of got into the action. And she took these photographs back to Alexei Brodovich, and he actually this time he put them in front of the class and was like, "Now this is what you want to be doing, everybody. Watch closely. These are amazing." And he said, "Okay, go off and take more of these. Make this into a story." And there's still some of her most groundbreaking pictures and her most iconic images. Anyway, so she did the whole story, and somebody she knew had a contact in London at Picture Post magazine, which was a very famous magazine in London, and she sent these pictures off to them, and they got published. And this is only the first ever photo story she ever did, and they happened to be seen by a photographer called Henri Cartier-Bresson, a very famous photographer who had just founded an agency called Magnum Photos, which is now a very well-known photographic agency. And on the strength of those photos, he invited her to join Magnum Photos, and that was the start of her photography career. And it just from there just exploded. But I just having spent time with her and kind of seeing her kind of entrepreneurial spirit and seeing her kind of get up and go, and her energy that she would put into everything she did. And she was still taking photographs in her 80s. She went off to Cuba when she was like 80 years old and did a story in Cuba. And I think kind of having seen that, when I decided what I wanted to do with my career, kind of having discovered acupuncture and kind of realizing, okay, I need to be self-employed. I need to make this work as a business. I need to be able to this to be self-sustaining. Nobody's going to give me a job doing this. I think more and more I'm realizing how her influence actually shaped what I realize. I don't kind of see things. If someone says, "Oh, you can't do that," I'm like, "Watch me," kind of thing, because that was kind of her attitude. That was her kind of energy that kind of rubbed off on me.
So that's an amazing story, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. What was your grandma's name?
Eve Arnold.
Eve Arnold. So if anyone's listening and wants to check out Eve Arnold's work, I'm sure Google can show you the way. So we
have a website. You can just go to evearnold.com and it talks about her work there. So
awesome. So just recapping kind of that history through your grandma's life and your grandma being a mentor, as you phrase it, and kind of dissecting that into the mindset frame. What I kind of interpret is that she had a passion in a time when perhaps that passion wouldn't have been nurtured or encouraged by society or the system or people. And she decided to follow her passion no matter what. And when people said she couldn't, she said, yes, I can. And more than anything, she was always willing to learn, but also in doing so, put herself in positions where perhaps, ladies of that caliber wouldn't normally have been found. So in other words, the abundance mindset would suggest that you cannot live in your comfort zone, and she was never willing to do so.
Yes, exactly. I think that whole idea of not living in your comfort zone, that is really powerful, and it's something that I sometimes forget it, obviously, like we all do. But I think the more we're able to stretch ourselves outside our comfort zone, the more fulfilled we're able to be. Because there's this idea that, and I see some people when I work with patients, for example, in my acupuncture practice, it's very easy to think, okay, I won't do this because it'll be scary. Or there's this idea that we've got to wait for the fear to go away until we do it, and then we can do it. It's like, well, that's not how it works, because doing something that's worthwhile is often something scary. And the more we stretch our comfort zone, the more we can do things that we didn't really realize we could.
And so talking about that fear, we all kind of feel fear in a different way, I think. How do you feel that fear when that fear comes upon you?
Good question. What do I think I kind of feel it in my chest sometimes. I feel like a kind of tightness. My heart beats faster. And it's often, when I'm doing something that, for me, often it's to do with like fear of how will this be received? What will other people think? What will they say? How will I be judged? And
so you're seeking validation.
Yes, that's a good recognition. And I think when I recognize that, for me, the key is to actually be aware of those processes, because I think when you're in it, or when I'm in that kind of fear and I'm just procrastinating perhaps, then I don't even notice what's going on. But as soon as I go, oh yeah, okay, that's just that fear of that I need to be validated, and actually, like, if I feel it in my heart, this is what needs to happen, that's all that matters. And I'll find a way. If it's meant to happen and I feel it, the worst that can happen is I look silly. But the worst can happen if I don't do it is I end up giving up on something that is really important to me. And I'd much rather risk looking stupid than give up on something that I'm passionate about.
Which is actually quite a unique trait, by the way. So I honor you for that. That is something that I'm sure myself at some point in my life needs to be encouraged.
Oh, I need to be encouraged on this too. I mean, it's not. I make it sound like I'm always able to do this, but it comes and goes. It's I think we're all on the journey, aren't we?
Yeah. One of my mentors very much talks about alignment and mind, body, spirit alignment, and I think that's kind of what we're beginning to touch on. You mentioned, feeling it in your heart. Now, what do? Do you just stick your hand inside and touch your heart and feel it, or how do you feel?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was about to kind of talk a little bit about what I do. So what I usually do is to actually do a practice of allowing, and this is something that I kind of learned this from Eckhart Tolle. He talks about I don't know if he uses the word allowing. I think he uses the word surrender, but I often use the word allowing, because what I find is that when I'm able to, like if you've got an emotion or a feeling trapped in your body, usually if you can locate it in your body, and if you can go into that feeling and just kind of sit with it and just notice what it feels like, then what you can often do is to release it, because the tension is often there because you're suppressing it, and you're saying to yourself, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that. I shouldn't be feeling that. And it kind of creates even more tension. And often the tension in the body is caused by this kind of suppression of the emotion that wants to express itself. Because fear isn't a bad thing. In fact, fear and excitement are actually the same emotion. So your body, when you're excited, your heart beats fast, your palms get sweaty, your pupils dilate. And I mean, there's even a neuroscientist who's come up with a method for actually turning anxiety into excitement. And what he does is he actually gets you to kind of feel the feelings and allow them. And he gets you, it does the thing where you kind of stand in what he calls a superhero pose. So you chest out and you're kind of standing straight and your kind of feet slightly apart. And he gets you to squeeze your hand 3 times, squeeze one hand. So you're anchoring the feeling in your body. And just repeat, I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. And you can feel the kind of it turns into excitement. The anxiety turns into excitement. So sometimes I'll do that, but other times I'll just do a kind of slightly more quiet inner version of that, of just kind of noticing what it feels like in my body and just kind of going into that tension in my chest and just being curious about it and going, oh, okay. Oh, there's a feeling there. It's not bad. It's not good. It's a feeling. And what usually happens after a minute or two is it starts to change. So it might not just disappear completely, but the quality of it might change into something that it feels okay. I can live with it. It's not like a bad feeling. It's more like an energetic vibration in my body.
So whilst we're live on the show, why don't you tell us what you're feeling right now?
What am I feeling right now? I'm feeling a little bit. I feel some of that tension in my chest right now, actually. Probably partly because I had a coffee before I came on, and also because I'm a little bit nervous being on doing an interview, which I think is normal.
The global stage.
That's it. Yes. But I think there's some people will say they don't feel any fear when they're in front of an audience, and maybe I'm sure that's true for some people. But I don't worry necessarily whether I feel a little bit of anxiety, because I think if you can manage it and if you can use it, because I often actually like that feeling of kind of a little bit of pressure, kind of like sharpens me. It kind of makes me feel a bit kind of like, okay, right, more alert. And then if I can kind of...
I had to give up coffee March 13th, 2020, because I loved that feeling, that buzz or that adrenaline or that, quick speed, because I used to be able to focus, and I got to the point where I was just drinking so much coffee to stay focused, and it wasn't obviously a real focus. So I stopped drinking coffee back then.
Well done. How have you found it?
Well, it was tough to begin with, but I knew that I was doing the right thing. I think we all have like addictions and stuff like that, and it doesn't have to be, such radical chemicals or anything like that. It can be things in our day-to-day lives that we've created habits over the years that we're just addicted to, and
yes.
we need that feeding into our system. So I know, just very quickly relating how you're feeling that tenseness and anxiety. When sports psychologists first came along, they really tried to look at what was happening with the athletes. And what they've done is they've said, right, let's not look at this as anxiety. Let's look at this as adrenaline. So now, rather than being in a negative state pre-match, pre-race, pre-challenge, whatever it is that you're taking on, you're now, I'm pumped, I'm ready for this, I'm going to succeed, I'm going to conquer. And it's the positive adrenaline side as opposed to the negative, which is fascinating.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And have you found that you've been able to still get into that state without the coffee, but is it more relaxed?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a very interesting question. First of all, people have said to me, so how do you feel now that you don't drink coffee? And my first answer in the first 6 months was probably, more often than not, Well, I feel great because I've given up something I was addicted to. And they were like, I'm pleased it's working out for you. And now as time goes on, I don't even notice it, to be honest. Like the reality is I don't need coffee to be at my best.
That's it.
I don't need coffee to be in a state of focus. What I need to focus is something that, like your grandma was, like we all do, have passions. I need to be passionate about something that I want to take it to the next stage. And in taking it to the next stage, I will always find myself in focus, because it's very difficult to take something to the next stage without being in focus.
Focus, I think that's a really important word, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've recently moved to Spain during the pandemic, and it was quite tough to focus here with the lockdowns and trying to progress my passions, because obviously we were all literally suppressed or caged in, or living without freedoms that we were used to. And I think for many people around the world, if not the majority, and probably 95, 98% of us, found that very difficult to deal with. And we all dealt with it in our own individual ways. And the way that I dealt with it has kind of led me to the Stay Outstanding podcast, which is that I determined I couldn't affect the outside world. So I thought I would go inwards and affect the inside world. So when I began to focus on that, then, there was a lot of passion there, because we're talking about me and my life and who I am and what I want to be.
I think that's really interesting. I think that in a way, on a bigger scale, if you look at, and I do believe everything happens for a reason. I do believe that something positive things will come out of this global crisis, and I think that's one of the things. It's something that I've been seeing with my patients, is that for people who are ready, it's really pushed people into their inner worlds. To when the outside world has been taken away, we don't have all the things that we can normally rely on to give us joy and to give us fulfillment. That people have been forced to find that within, and that's, to me, that's the only real source of freedom, and the only real source of fulfillment is within. So it'd be interesting to see whether on a global scale more people are seeking an inner journey, because of their experience during the pandemic.
I think just naturally, and if we're just talking about statistics and numbers, there must be. The question, or the greater question, would be how many of those numbers have gone on to action something that, when the freedoms are allowed again, or we have those freedoms, how many of them will go on to actually create something that will be of value to the external world. I think that creation value is very important, because otherwise we're kind of stagnant in our being and we're not growing. And the reality is, unfortunately, people are sheep. They're followers, not leaders. And what we need at a time like this is more leaders. And leaders will tend to come out of environments and situations like this, creating something that others will then go ahead and follow. And so hopefully there's a lot of people out there creating a lot of good things, good causes, for good reasons, with good passion and energy and vibrations that will add a lot of value to our world.
Well, I think one thing I've noticed is that crisis is often necessary for evolution, either whether on a personal level or a global level. And I think once you've been through something that changes you, some kind of crisis that changes you, when this has been my experience anyway, you can't unsee what you've seen, or you can't go backwards. You something You go through a crisis and you find a way to transcend that, or to transcend it. And that creates a change inside, and you realize that you have immense power within. We all have immense power within. And you can then pretend that hasn't happened and go back to kind of life, business as usual if you want to. But I don't think you can ever. I think there will always be that bit of you that are like, oh, okay, yeah, there's more to life than actually the surface level. And I see that with a lot of the students that come to us that want to learn to be a 5-element acupuncturist. They kind of say, okay, for a long time I've been ignoring this kind of voice in my ear that's been telling me I need to do something more than the 9 to 5. But it's taking me this long to actually go, right, okay, now I'm going to do it. I mean, so my kind of first real kind of experience of kind of crisis and transcendence was actually what led me to become a 5-element acupuncturist as well. So what happened when I was about 17 or 18 years old, my best friend at the time killed himself. He was, I didn't realize at the time just how bad a place he was in. I think looking back on it, if I'd known more about mental health and psychology, I would have realized that probably, in traditional medicine, he would have been diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was absolutely brilliant and amazing artist, just so insightful. And he would talk actually about the spiritual revolution that is coming, that we're now seeing. And this was like 25 years ago. And he was like, there's a spiritual revolution coming. So he would be extremely, he was a genius, but he was also very tormented. Anyway, this kind of really hit me bad, and I didn't know how to process it. So I kind of shut away all the grief. And what happened was, a year later, I started to get insomnia, because I just shut away all the feelings. And my mum was having acupuncture at the time, and she said, oh, why don't you try acupuncture? I'm seeing this amazing 5-element acupuncturist. It's really amazing. And I was like, to be honest, right now, I'd do anything to sleep. I would try anything. So I went along, and first thing was amazing was this guy was just so easy to talk to, just really just like a normal. I just had a chat with him. I talked about what had happened, and I just felt like I was sitting with a friend, kind of just talking about how, what had happened and how I was feeling. So he did the first treatment, and I remember kind of walking out afterwards. I was like, oh, this could be placebo, but I feel like something's shifted. I feel a bit lighter. I feel like, oh, okay. Anyway, so I went about my kind of week, and I was at university at the time. I was studying neuroscience at UCL, and I remember being in one of the lectures, and I remember kind of something felt different. I remember talking to my classmates, and suddenly, for the first time in quite a while, I could feel this connection and this warmth coming from the people around me, and I felt part of something. I felt connected, and I realized that something had shifted within me. And I went back and I told Dave, my acupuncturist, what had happened. He said, that's really interesting, because this treatment is actually, what I'd noticed is that you'd cut yourself off from your inner world. You cut yourself off from your kind of your core and your essence, if you like. And this treatment I did, it was about reconnecting you. So that's why you're able to feel emotions again. You can feel the warmth from the people around you because you can feel your own emotions. And I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting. And then we kind of talked a bit more, and he said, have you ever grieved for your friend James? And I said, well, I think I just kind of put on a bit of a brave face and just carried on and just said, well, it was what he wanted and I couldn't have done anything, and I kind of rationalized it. And he said, okay, well, how would it feel to actually allow yourself to feel that grief? And I was like, why would I want to do that? That'd be dreadful. And he was like, well, just see, I'm just putting it out there. So anyway, a few days later, started to kind of feel a bit kind of sad. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens if I just allow this feeling. A bit like what we were talking about before about the allowing. We'll see what happens if I just allow this grief to come up. And so I did. I kind of sat down. I could feel this immense sadness and grief and loss. But something weird happened at the same time. Because I was completely allowing it, there was a kind of undercurrent underneath the surface level of emotion. So the undercurrent of peace, of kind of like acceptance and peace. And then a second later, there was this instinct kind of kicked in to push away the emotion, to kind of, and I did, and I pushed, and I was like, oh, that didn't feel good. And I realized that actually it was the pushing away that was causing the suffering. It wasn't the allowing. And I was like, oh, wow. This is something I'd never realized my whole life, that actually by allowing the feeling, whatever that feeling is, you can feel a sense of peace because you're not resisting. And actually what I realized is that I'd been suppressing it and keeping it in place. And that was what caused the insomnia. And by allowing it, it wasn't pleasant. There was a painfulness, but there was also a deeper sense of peace, which was much more fundamental than the emotion of sadness and loss. And this was a real awakening for me, a real kind of eye opener. And over the course of the next kind of month or two, I kept going back and had weekly sessions. And what started to happen, my sleep started to get better. Within about 6 weeks, my sleep was completely back to normal again. But what was different was that the sense of peace just kind of stayed. And I started to experience this sense of peace that literally I'd never felt in my whole life. And I remember one morning waking up, and for some reason, I hadn't slept very well. I think I'd gone to bed quite late and I'd woken up early. And normally I was really obsessed with the fact that I had to have a good night's sleep in order to feel good. And I hadn't had that much sleep, but I still felt good. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, maybe sleep isn't that important, as important as I thought. If I miss one night's sleep isn't going to make me feel bad. Okay, maybe it's my own internal state that is actually more important. And I remember even trying to think of things that would normally make me feel stressed. And I was like, if I think of that would normally, no, that's not working. Okay, no, I still feel peaceful. And it's kind of varied in intensity since then, but I've never kind of lost kind of connection with that inner kind of sense of peace that's always with us. And I remember thinking like, well, this is amazing. Why does nobody know about this 5-element acupuncture stuff? I've heard about, a lot of people know that acupuncture can help for back pain and physical stuff, but nobody, as far as I knew that it was a kind of transformative tool for kind of our inner transformation. So anyway, I finished my acupuncture, my neuroscience degree, and straight away started studying acupuncture to become a 5-element acupuncture. It was just such a no-brainer. I was like, I realized actually that neuroscience was interesting, and I still found it fascinating. But I realized that the questions that I was asking were to do with like, what is consciousness? Why are we here? Who are we? That I realized actually the acupuncture was answering those questions, but on a personal level. And I realized that perhaps science isn't quite ready yet to answer those questions of what is consciousness. And I also realized that I wanted to work with people. I wanted to work one-to-one with people and help them in the same way that I'd been helped. So it was really a no-brainer. I feel like the acupuncture found me. I wasn't looking for it. It just kind of came to me, and I was like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, okay, right. Let's do this. I never looked back.
That's really an amazing and powerful story or recount of your experience. So thank you for sharing that with us, Michael. That's really
thank you.
Very kind for being so open. Just give us a brief explanation of what 5-element acupuncture is.
So let's start with what the 5 elements are. So the 5 elements are talked about in various different traditions of acupuncture, but they have a special place within 5-element acupuncture. But when a lot of people, when they hear the phrase 5 elements, it sounds a little bit kind of archaic, like the Greek 4 elements: air, water, wind, fire. The thing is, I think the word element is actually not the best translation. So a better way of looking at them is 5 phases. So the best way of understanding what the 5 elements are phases in a cycle. So what the ancient Taoists, thousands of years ago, so the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu, was the first kind of Taoist text. And the word Tao means the way, or it's often translated as the one life, the one kind of consciousness that we are. You could even say God, if that didn't have kind of religious connotations. But the ancient Taoists were amazing at observing the cycles of nature. And what they saw is that everything in life moves in cycles. So the best way of observing it is if you look at the seasons. So the seasons move through a cycle of different phases. We have 4 seasons, but the ancient Taoists saw that there was an extra season that they called the harvest, because the height of summer and autumn, and in between there's the harvest, because the energy of the harvest is very different from the energy of summer. So a good way of what I can do is I can relate it to just to kind of show the parallel. Let's say we're talking about the life cycle of a project, just to show that the cycles are, you can transpose it onto any cycle you want. So the seasons are obvious. So you have springtime, which is a very powerful kind of, the energy of springtime is all about growth and rebirth. Everything's kind of bursting into life, where, in the middle of winter, there was nothing. And then suddenly there's new life shooting out everywhere. You could liken that to the initiation phase of any project. So you have to have ideas, you have to have plans, you have to make decisions. You have to kind of have a vision of what you want to carry out if you've got a project. This is very much about the energy of the wood element, which relates to the springtime. The next phase is what's called the fire element, which you can look at as being summertime, which is when everything kind of reaches its zenith. It's the maximum warmth, the maximum yang. Everything's expansive. Everything kind of is reaching its maximum capacity, its maximum capability. If you're carrying out a project, it's like when everything is in its growth, its maximum growth. So all your plans have been put into action. You've done everything you set out to do. Everything has reached its maximum growth. It's kind of characterized also by kind of real joy and excitement, and kind of, think about summertime. It's a time of excitement, of joy, of enjoyment. Except right now it's summertime, but it's not. It doesn't feel like summertime in this country anyway. Probably where you are, it probably feels a lot more like summertime.
Certainly does.
But anyway, the next phase you have to have is the harvest. So every phase in every cycle, you have to reap the fruits of your labors. So once you've kind of the plans have been put into action, you get to the phase of the cycle where you reap the fruits of your labors. So there's a fruition. Everything kind of comes to fruition, and the flowers on the trees turn to fruit on the tree. So you actually get to pick the fruits, and you get to harvest all the fruits. So you have a harvest, you have an abundance. There's a real abundance that comes from that, and you store it away in the grain storehouse, or you have an apple storehouse, and you get this sense of kind of fulfillment. And then you have to have the next phase in the cycle where everything that grows has to die at some point. So there has to be a dying back. But what looks like just death is also a consolidation process. So even if you look at the trees, for example, the trees lose their leaves, but when they change color, the reason they change color is because the plants are sucking back all the vital nutrients back into the earth, back into the roots of the plant. So there's been growth, and they're taking those nutrients that have grown throughout the cycle of the growing period, and they're consolidating. They're going, right, I'm going to take what I need, take all the good stuff, and let go of all the dead stuff that I don't need anymore. And it's the same with a project. You've seen what's worked. You're going to keep hold of that, and you're going to keep it for the next iteration, for the next cycle, and you're going to get rid of all the stuff that didn't work, what you no longer need. So there's this kind of death, but also quality. There's also a kind of like crystallizing the most important qualities. And then the next phase is the water. So that's called the metal element, because of this aspect of quality. It's like the nuggets of gold under the earth. When you put in a pressure on carbon, it turns to diamond. The next phase in the cycle is the water element, and that's about gestation. So everything has kind of gone. The year has gone to bed. The trees are bare. We have wintertime. And it's a time where everything is very still. There's a kind of, it's the maximum yin, where it's like the nighttime. If you're looking at the cycle of the day and night, it's the time when the rest needs to happen. But there's also something very powerful happening under the surface. So it looks like there's no activity, but there's a germination. So a lot of seeds need a cold snap to germinate. And that germination and kind of gestation. So if you look at the life cycle of an animal, there has to be a gestation in the womb. So there's a kind of build up of energy and power. And if we can get in touch with that energy ourselves, that's where all our power comes from. We're kind of tapping into that still place where we can feel that kind of power. That throughout the winter, it actually kind of grows and it grows and it builds and it builds until it's about to explode. And that's what gives rise to springtime. Because that spring energy doesn't come out of nowhere. It has to have a building of power that then allows the buds to explode. And we have that within us too, the ability to tap into that power within when we engage with that stillness. And so those are the 5 elements. And then in 5-element acupuncture, the idea is that we all have one of those 5 elements that is the weak area. It's like an Achilles heel. And when you identify that and you strengthen that area, that's the best treatment you can do for that person. Because each of those elements, as well as having corresponding emotions, it also has corresponding organs and corresponding spiritual functions like vision, like warmth, like quality, like power. So by restoring balance in the area where it's weakest, the person is able to heal themselves, because you're just providing the right environment for the healing to happen.
Amazing, amazing. So you and I have actually, well, you've actually done acupuncture on myself. And I'd like to give the audience a testimonial here and now. There's no paid commitment here from Michael or anything. We're just talking as friends. But I have benefited from Michael's skill sets and expertise in acupuncture. I used to suffer with migraines at one stage when I was going through something, and with Michael's help, I was able to alleviate those migraines and stop taking the pills, the chemicals the doctors had prescribed me. So that was a great experience, and thank you again, Michael, for that.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm really glad it helps you.
There's actually a funnier story, which is, I remember Michael invited me to what was it, that specific event, Michael?